is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
It's the beginning of a new era. It's time to work on ensuring security for our people. It's the beginning of the realization of a democratic Somalia. It's the beginning of the fight against corruption. I promise to restore justice and equality in Somalia.
It's the beginning of a new era for Somalia. That's according to the newly elected President Mohamed Adbullahi Farmajo. Now, after 3 decades of no effective central government, Farmajo's victory is being interpreted as a signal for new hope for the troubled nation. But the road to reform will not be an easy one. The aid-dependent state faces an imminent food crisis, empty coffers, and an ongoing Islamist insurgency. But the new president has vowed to get to work immediately. So what is Farmajo's game plan for the nation in the Horn of Africa? And will the new government finally find a permanent solution for Somalia? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, after a tense build-up to Somalia's elections, new President Mohamed Adbullahi Mohamed, better known as Farmajo, faces an uphill task. The dual U.S.-Somali citizen who worked for years in the New York State Department of Transport must now appoint a prime minister from a different dominant clan to balance the country's power system. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo filed this report from Mogadishu.
It's the first meeting between President Mohamed Adbullahi Farmajo and former President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud following Mahmoud's election defeat. According to the transition team, President Farmajo's inauguration is planned for later in February. But it's clear the new president has his work already cut out for him. His election seen as a revolution by many Somalis and a public answer for change. The president's first task, appointing a prime minister, one who must hail from a different clan than the president. Somalia's political structure is a clan-based system known as 4.5 formula, involving 4 predominant tribes and minority clans.
Somalia's political system is based on clans, a system referred to as 4.5 that was created after the Civil War. This system must be abolished. It denies individuals a chance to be named in top positions if one of their clan members holds a different office. Both parliament and executive must work to end clan-based politics.
A variety of candidates, among them presidential hopefuls who lost to Farmajo in Wednesday's presidential elections, are among those eyeing this position. But how his administration overcomes clan politics remains Farmajo's biggest test for now. The president has exactly 30 days to appoint a prime minister according to the country's constitution. Experts say his choice must reflect the public's expectations.
The choice of prime minister is very important and will determine how the president will be viewed. Based on the current circumstances, the prime minister who will be appointed must be one who will capitalize on changes in the top office and assist the president on delivering campaign pledges.
Political bickering between past administrations has seen each president appoint at least 3 prime ministers and governments, all in a span of a 4-year period. Farmajo, a former prime minister from 2010 to 2011, was a victim of political instability that ultimately saw his resignation following a fallout with then-President Sheikh Sharif Sheikh Ahmed and Parliament Speaker Sharif Hassan Sheikh Aden.
The political culture we have right now is no longer acceptable. I will introduce a different kind of political culture, which the president and the prime minister should work together during the tenure of the next 4 years.
In Mogadishu, clan elders and members of parliament are holding a series of meetings aimed at picking favorites for the position that many say will be the litmus test for Farmajo's government that already enjoys massive public support. Abdulaziz Billo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
And now to offer analysis into the Somali elections and what lies ahead for the country, I have expert guests standing by. In Mogadishu, author and political analyst Mohamed Adbullahi. In Nairobi, Rashid Abdi, Horn of Africa Project Director at the International Crisis Group. And with me in studio, Agostino Neto. He's a Kenyan Member of Parliament here in Nairobi. Welcome to the program. And I'll start off with all of you gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here on Talk Africa. There is so much optimism, Mohamed Adbullahi, in Mogadishu. There is so much optimism after the election of President-elect Farmajo there. Can we say, though, that Somalia is now out of the woods when it comes to conflict-wise? Is Somalia now able to manage its own affairs?
Thank you very much. Somalia is not able to manage its own affairs, but it is any stage that it can start managing its own affairs if it can get support from the regional states and the international community. Somalia is all the way coming from the ruins of the civil war to any state building, where we are now at the stage of forming all the federal states that are the components of the government now. So the country is heading towards the rebuilding and the return of the Somalia that can contribute to the security, economy, and everything in the region.
Rashid Abdi, is that your sentiment as well, that Somalia is now able to manage its own affairs, or is at that stage where it is beginning to manage its own affairs?
I think undoubtedly we have, I think, a moment of hope in Somalia. This president is extremely popular. He comes at, I think, at a time when, the country is, has achieved at least some progress in terms of federalization. Security, I think, remains the big challenge. However, I think no doubt Somalia has, I think, a moment of hope, and I think we hope that in the coming few weeks, this president will move, I think, with speed to create, a government, appoint a prime minister, and also begin to tackle the hard, I think, challenges that face the country.
Agostino Neto, this is a moment of hope for Somalia. Is that what you're seeing from neighboring Kenya?
I think first, congratulations to the people of Somalia for election of a president. I really think it's been long in coming, and I think it's something that we should herald them for doing. Somalia, the work just starts right now, and I really think that as a neighboring state, Kenya has suffered a lot from Somalia, either because of insecurity and also issues of refugees. I think Kenya wishes Somalia very well in everything it plans to do, but I think this is a great moment that Somalia can now be helped to start the walk towards a proper, good national governance. There have already been good examples in parts of Somalia. I mean, you're talking about the federal states of Puntland, federal states of Somaliland. Those are examples that have shown that Somali people can actually govern themselves. So I really think that what the president right now needs to do is to work towards a proper federation of states of Somalia, one that is not too centrally powerful, but with various federations that are strong enough. And I think then Somalia will be able to get its way out of the woods.
Right. Abu Bekr, of course, there is a lot of optimism coming from the panel here. But as you mentioned, Somalia is starting to take the small steps. Now, what is the stumbling block?
The good example is Somalia is the state that all the states are formed and the security is at large. But what the plug is now is the president now has a huge hope himself to work with the SNA and the other security institutions. Then to restore the security institutions may mean that Somalia may implement one step forward to its hope of returning as a state that it can control its borders, fight against the insecurity that can affect Kenya and the other neighboring countries like Ethiopia, Djibouti, Yemen. And yeah, we are in that stage that Somalia is taking one step forward after building the states that exist now.
Right. Rashid Ali, what do you see as the stumbling blocks that remain for Somalia?
As Abubakar mentioned, I think security remains the biggest challenge. We must remember that the current president, when he was a prime minister, actually built excellent relationship with the Somali National Army, as well as with the security services. And we saw on the night of his election how soldiers came to the streets actually to fire weapons into the air in jubilation. And no doubt, if there is one person who can really fix the security problem in Somalia, then it must be this president. However, I think he faces a number of structural problems, which is that the Somali army still remains small. It still remains, I think, dependent on donor funding. So a lot of hard work ought to be done, and also a lot of resource mobilization. But I think that this president probably has a better chance at finding a solution to the security problem. But I must emphasize that the problem in Somalia has not been security. Security is actually a symptom. The bigger problem, I think, the quintessential problem of Somalia is political. And unless, I think, we begin to see a political settlement to many of the crises, I think the security challenge will not disappear, and Al-Shabaab will continue to remain, I think, a serious problem.
And we will look at Somalia's security and political challenges in a moment, but I do want to hear your views, of course, Agostino Neto, because Kenya has been watching Somalia for the last 26 years since it went into conflict. What do you think still remains to be done to ensure Somalia is stable, or what are the stumbling blocks towards that?
I think the last speaker said it very well, that Somalia's greatest problem, insecurity is an international problem. Even fledgling democracies like Kenya, Nigeria also have insecurity problems. But insecurity is a symptom of a more underlying problem. Somalia has hope in a proper federal constitution, because the governance structure of Somalia, we've seen that when the various federal states have done very well. What you have a problem is a clan fight in Somalia, which then gives rise to Al-Shabaab and the sort. So that if at all you really have a proper federal constitution where you have stronger federal states, because if Puntland is working, Somaliland is working, that means that they're happy to govern themselves. And in those regions you do not have Al-Shabaab insurgencies. That means that it's possible to have a Somali homegrown sort of governance structure. That is what they really need to figure out. What sort of constitution that would be good for Somali and the people of Somaliland. And I think if at all we get that right, then there should not be a problem in Somalia.
Right, we'll leave it there for the moment and take a short break. But when we return, we'll have more analysis into President-elect Farmajo's plans for Somalia. To stay with us. Africa is not one story.
Farmajo's election victory reflects the victory of the Somali public. It's the first time a candidate chosen by the public has won. Leaders have been elected into office before, but they've never had public interests at heart.
As the young people of Somalia, we see Wednesday's victory as the new Independence Day for Somalia. It's not independence from colonial masters, but we've finally liberated the country from leaders who didn't prioritize our interests.
We welcome you, President Farmajo. We are your citizens and we love you. Mr. President, we the Somali women have a message for you. Let's stop the migration of our young boys and girls. Let's support the disadvantaged as well as women and children.
Those were the views of Somali citizens on their newly elected President Mohamed Adbullahi Farmajo. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, in the run-up to the vote last Wednesday, the terrorist grouping Al-Shabaab warned it would disrupt the polls, terming it as illegitimate. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo reports from Mogadishu on what locals and experts hope Farmajo's government would do to stabilize the country.
The election took place at this heavily fortified airport compound that's also home to the African Union Mission Headquarters, AMISOM. Initially, the voting was set to take place at this police academy where 329 legislators were sworn in. But due to safety concerns, members of parliament and candidates opted a different venue. Al-Shabaab has attacked this venue in the past using suicide bombers, and in the run-up to the presidential vote, the group intensified its attacks across the capital, including this deadly bombing near the parliament buildings that claimed 28 lives. Authorities have been battling an armed militant group that's attacked beyond Somalia, despite support from a 22,000-strong multinational peacekeeping force, AMISOM. The militant group is yet to comment on President Farmajo's victory. Farmajo, a former prime minister, helped drive out the militants from the capital in 2011.
Somalia, just like any other world country, is faced with the harsh reality of terrorism. The new administration has to address security. It has to come up with new ideas different from the current counter-terrorism strategy against the Al-Shabaab.
African Union forces are due to start a troop drawdown in late 2018. Uganda is due to start in late 2017. However, experts say the country's army cannot go it alone. Al-Shabaab has waged a relentless guerrilla war in Somalia for almost a decade, overrunning African Union and Somali bases and carrying out deadly bombings nationwide.
The government should also open dialogue with armed groups operating in Somalia, a different kind of dialogue from what previous governments did, just like other countries like Afghanistan that negotiated with armed groups in Doha. The government should consider dialogue as its first option before it moves to other options available.
President Farmajo is, however, optimistic his government will defeat Al-Shabaab. On the streets of Mogadishu, soldiers fired in the air after he was declared president.
Revamping the country's security forces should be the president's main priority. The forces must be well paid. If the soldier doesn't get his benefits, then this will lead to insecurity once again.
The public also has vowed to support his administration. Thousands continue to take to the streets in Mogadishu and beyond to support Farmajo's presidency, a leader seen by many here as the public choice. But security forces here are not taking any chances. The militant group has in the past carried out deadly attacks along this strategic road, targeting key hotels and government officials. But now, with President Farmajo in the country's top office, experts here say how his administration will deal with the Al-Qaeda-linked militants remain the biggest question. Abdulaziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
And we continue our discussion now, and I still have my expert guests standing by. In Mogadishu, author and political analyst Abubakar Al-Badri. In Nairobi, Rashid Abdi, Horn of Africa Project Director at the International Crisis Group. And with me in studio, Agostino Neto, a Kenyan Member of Parliament. Gentlemen, thank you. Let's look at the president's agenda here, and I'll start off with you, Abubakar Al-Badri. One of the issues that the president brought up was security and you know, how he will deal with Somalia's security there, and particularly how he will deal with his own security forces and less interference from foreign troops. What kind of a security agenda are we likely to see from President Farmajo?
President Farmajo has a good speech at the parliament during his campaign to the presidential campaign, and in his speech he commented about AMISOM, which is African Union mission in Somalia. He commented about strengthening Somali security forces, including the SNA, the police, and the National Intelligence Agency. And with his speech and what he believes in, he wants the AMISOM forces, which he sees now not functional, to be more functional and more contributing. And to that matter, he wants also the Somali National Army strengthened and be functional as well. So if he wants to at least restore some security into the country, he wants to have good relationship with the neighboring countries who are also troop contributing countries to the to AMISOM. And yes, we can say that without the good contribution, good relationship with the neighboring countries, it will be a lot of challenge for him to solve the security issues in the country. But if he opens the gates for them, the doors for them, still we need Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Uganda to have good relationship with the new president, to have different approach in terms of restoration of peace and security in the country. That's what I think is the momentum that Somalia may restore its law and order.
Right, Rashid Abdi, your thoughts on that?
I think the issue of AMISOM, I think, remains, I think, critical. And this president has in the past, I think, been a bit critical of AMISOM. And I think he will probably demand some kind of a very clear exit strategy for AMISOM. And I think what he intends to do is actually, first of all, begin to rebuild Somalia's security forces and the national army. And once he has done that, get a clear, I think, timeline or timetable from AMISOM, so that by the time AMISOM begins a phased exit, then more security responsibility will be taken over by the Somali National Army. I think that is his plan. Whether he's going to achieve that in 2 years, 3 years, I don't know. But I think clearly, even on the part of AMISOM and the troop contributing countries, I think there is a clear recognition now that they need to, I think, begin a phased exit from Somalia, largely because I think federal entities have emerged. They have significantly, I think, degraded Al-Shabaab's conventional capabilities.
Right.
But I think they want to leave the job to Somalis to complete.
Abuka, a while back, Agostino Neto mentioned that Puntland and Somaliland are functional country or functional semi-autonomous regions there. So why isn't it working for South Central Somalia?
South Central Somalia have been in more conflict than in Somaliland and in Puntland for a long time. And they had established newly federal states that are now members of the federal government of Somalia. And in some places, though they don't control all the areas under their states, they can still establish some sort of functioning administration in their parts. And they contributed to the election of the parliament and the upper house of the parliament, and they contributed to the election of the president and everything going on in Somalia now. And the international community and the neighboring countries also know this. But the missing link is when it comes to the security, if I mention about AMISOM, the troop contributing countries have different agendas and different interests, and the different interests also is clearly visible in the country. So that's one of the problems ahead of AMISOM. That's why they are not contributing to the security of the country, and there are 22,000 strong forces from different countries in the region. And the other problem is Al-Shabaab is still less than 10,000 fighters. So if 2,000 or 22,000 forces strongly armed and backed by the UN Security Council and the African Union cannot still beat 11,000, then the question comes why SNA, which is a local initiative, and the local forces can't deal with it.
Right.
But they don't get the support AMISOM is getting. If they get those support from the international community, then SNA may sort out the things that AMISOM cannot sort out because of the differences of the troop contributing countries.
Right, Agostino Neto, though.
I think one of the things that we need to understand about Somalia and Al-Shabaab is that insecurity is because of deep-seated issues. In fact, I don't know how it gets to the figure of 11,000 insurgents as being part of Al-Shabaab. The problem of Al-Shabaab is they want a stake at the governance table. And so long as you can be able to deal with that and give people apportion rights and make sure that everyone else feels comfortable, then I really don't even think you will then be bothered about AMISOM and its mandate. Granted that, yes, whenever countries contribute troops, they always have various interests. That you cannot even stop, even if it's not just in Somalia. But I really think that you cannot then underscore the fact that AMISOM troops have not been able to deal properly with Al-Shabaab, because who knows who Al-Shabaab is? I mean, Al-Shabaab is an insurgent group. It's not visible, and you cannot put your hand onto it. So I really think that the moment you really have a good structured Somali government, then you'll really have dealt with the problem of Al-Shabaab.
Right, Rashid Abdi.
Yes, I think the Al-Shabaab and how to, I think, deal with Al-Shabaab will become, I think, a big problem as we go forward. First of all, I think no doubt that the struggle against Al-Shabaab will have to involve, I think, military capabilities. Al-Shabaab still remains, I think, quite active as a rural guerrilla insurgency. But also, we have seen in the last 2 years in particular how it has become even more lethal as an urban guerrilla movement. It continuously carries, every 1 month or every even 2 weeks, they carry out a major attack inside Somalia. And Mogadishu in particular remains, I think, highly insecure.
Right.
So Al-Shabaab, I think, remains a critical challenge, and how to deal with it will have to involve improving the capability of the security services. But I think, as the Mheshimiwa has indicated, I think the problem is also political. We have to, I think, undermine the political discontent on which Al-Shabaab feeds.
Right. Abubakar al-Badri, though, President Farmajo has previously mentioned that he might like to engage with Al-Shabaab as one way of containing that situation. Is that a welcome thought?
I think in one way it is welcome because Al-Shabaab itself is disintegrated. There are more militant groups that are now closely leaning towards ISIS, and there is an Al-Qaeda wing which is strong enough to launch those security operations on the camps of AMISOM and the SNA. But there is still a wider element of Al-Shabaab that's not happy with the way Al-Shabaab itself is doing its things, because they are Somalis, they have families, they have clans, they have relatives in the areas where the things are happening. So many of them will at least open doors for the words of the president. They will listen and they will wait and see how he is going to approach. If he has a good approach that can open the doors for them to come and surrender or to come and join the government or other institutions, then there is a hope. But it depends on how he approaches and how his prime minister approaches.
Right, so I want to get a final comment from all of you, though, and we agreed at the beginning of this program that Somalia has now begun taking its baby steps towards stabilization of the country. So very briefly, what should the new government do to find or to have a permanent solution to Somalia's political or security crisis?
First, we wish the people of Somalia very well in all that they're going to do with the new presidency. But two things I think they quickly need to do. One, work towards an all-encompassing constitution that makes the central government less powerful and the federal states more stronger. That is the first thing. But the second thing is to ensure that their neighbors, the good partners, Kenya and the Djibouti and Ethiopia, they're in good neighborliness, not really doing anything else that might give room to stoking other fires in Somalia.
Right, Rashid Abdi?
I think from me it will be inclusive politics. I think from my own experience of following Somalia for a number of years, I think one of the biggest problems is actually how to build inclusive governments, both at the national and also subnational level. Once you have inclusive governments, I think you will begin to marginalize insurgent groups that are actually seeking violent means to I think, have their political agenda fulfilled. Then I think also, I must echo also what the MP has just said, which is that Somalia cannot stabilize unless it has a stable relationship with, I think, its neighbors. And I think the current president ought to, I think, build bridges and begin to overcome some of the mutual suspicion that he may actually be hostile to some of these countries.
Abubakar al-Badri, you have the final word.
Thank you very much. I agree with them, and what I add is just the reconciliation in the country. And from the other end of the region, the president will need to have good relationship with the neighboring countries, including Ethiopia and Kenya. But also Ethiopia and Kenya need to change the faces of their diplomatic relationship and security relationship with Somalia so that they can at least deal with a new situation that can serve for the interest of all the countries.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights. And that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to my guests for their insights. In Mogadishu, author and political analyst Abubakar al-Badri. In Nairobi, Rashid Abdi, Horn of Africa Project Director at the International Crisis Group. And with me in studio, Agostino Neto. He's a Kenyan Member of Parliament here in Nairobi.
Thank you very much, Beatrice.
Thank you for being with us on the program. And remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. Goodbye.